Money FM 89.3, the best of Saturday mornings. International News Review.
President Trump is calling this trade deal with Japan this week the largest trade deal in history. And all of a sudden, the Japanese are even coming back and saying, wait a minute, he's saying that we agreed to things that we didn't agree to and blah, blah, blah. Here we go. What do we know, Steve, about what we think this deal actually encompasses?
Well, when Donald Trump makes it very clear, I send a 1.5-page letter out, that is a contract and it is a deal. Now, the Japanese and everybody else are saying, I don't think so. So all of these deals, Philippines and Indonesia and Vietnam and Japan, they are not deals. And we don't know what they are. We don't know what's in them. We don't know what either side has agreed to. And so I really do not understand why the market is reacting so positively to this news. I mean, I'll just give you a simple example. The Treasury Secretary, after this quote-unquote deal was signed, and the Treasury Secretary, Bessent, says if Japan fails to live up to its commitments, these 15% tariffs are going to be taken right back to 25%. Japan's chief negotiator says, I have, quote unquote, no recollection of this. So we're not much further along than we've been. We have no agreements. There is nothing in writing. Nothing has been signed. The two sides are disagreeing on the interpretations. And then the Japan one is even more insane because there's this $550 billion fund that nobody knows what that entails.
I'm so glad you said this. When I was in Malaysia, our good friend of the show and trade expert, Deborah Elms, was on my TV in the hotel room saying exactly the same as you. She was being asked question after question, and she kept saying, what deal? There is no evidence. My point is, Steve, are we going to keep doing this? Are we going to keep going round and round every time Donald Trump tweets something? There's no substance. There's nothing set in stone, and no disrespect to you or Deb Elms or anybody else in geopolitics, but you effectively keep saying the same thing every week. There's no details. There's nothing concrete. There's nothing set in stone.
Well, I mean, I think that the Debs and the me's of the world, and there's others, of course, who are there with us, really need to make sure that businesses understand there is still nothing but uncertainty in the market, and you can't make any commitments as long as we don't know what this is. And look, the biggest story playing out from an economic perspective in the United States is, will the Fed lower interest rates? And if you look at the U.S. economy, the interest rate should be coming down because where is unemployment and where is the market? Yet the chairman of the Fed, Jay Powell, makes very clear, because of these tariffs and because we have no idea what's coming, I'm keeping the interest rates high. And so the Fed chair is making very clear there is nothing but uncertainty here. People who really have done trade for their lives, Deb, much more than I have, are making very clear this is just nothing that you can count on. Yet the market seems to like it. We don't get it.
Okay, let's bring it back to home. I am reading that this deal, in inverted commas, will put more pressure on other countries, particularly major Asian exporters, to secure better agreements before the 1st of August deadline. What will it mean for smaller ASEAN countries who, frankly, have less to offer the U.S. than Japan?
Well, first of all, this whole deadline thing is nonsense because we have no idea. Donald Trump does this is a made up. So there is no deadline. And maybe August 1st will be a day and maybe it won't. We have no idea. But what the
deadlines always seem to shift, with
of course.
Him. Along with the tariff rates.
Yeah.
And so, but if you're a country like Singapore, which is, and there was Barclays did a study, Singapore is the most exposed country in the world to tariffs. And it's not because of the reciprocal tariff rate of 10%. It's because Donald Trump has said, I'm going to put national security tariffs on semiconductors and on pharma. We have no idea how broad pharma is, but those are two real critical industries to Singapore. And if Singapore gets hit with sectoral tariffs on a national security perspective on pharmaceuticals and on semiconductors, it is going to have a serious impact on the economy. That's why, Deputy Prime Minister Ghani is spending so much time in Washington trying to make sure that Singapore gets exempted from whatever it is Donald Trump's going to do going forward. So what the Japan deal isn't really that relevant to Singapore. What's really relevant to Singapore is, can it make the case that it should be exempted from these coming national security tariffs? Again, nothing but uncertainty, and that's all we have.
It must be so confusing and frustrating. Like Aaron said just a moment ago when he was here, businesses just want certainty. We've said this for years now on the show here when talking about Trump and what he wants to do. But it must be so frustrating for the Singapore government and others to go and spend all this time trying to make sure that there is some sanity to the policy, and then there could be for a minute, and then 10 minutes later it gets changed again. There's a tweet, yeah, or an X. I know this is the world we're in, but it just is. It's wow.
But what businesses need to understand is, while you can't make any decisions because you don't know what the tariff rate is going to be,
right.
you don't know what the what the investment rules are going to be, but we know directionally where it's coming, and in an odd way, Donald Trump, and we just had Aaron Kramer from BSR was in the studio. The deal, and we put in air quotes, the deal with Indonesia has a very strict forced labor provision in it. And while we talk about Donald Trump being anti-ESG and anti-woke, and you look at all of the statements that he and his administration make in the U.S. about sustainability matters, in Asia, you have to become more sustainable, because you can see the direction these deals are going. Because it's not just about tariffs. We all talk about, is it going to be 25%? Is it going to be 15%? And it's not just all about investment, because part of the America First argument against doing trade with countries in Southeast Asia, it will exempt Singapore, of course, on this front, is that there is so much forced labor in this part of the region. There is so much non-compliance to global standards when it comes to the environment, and that is an unfair advantage these countries have when they export to the U.S. So we are going to make them raise their standards on the environment, and we're going to make them raise their standards on labor. And this is something that the Biden administration said, and the Trump administration is doing it with a lot more teeth. So if you're a business, there are some things you have uncertainty on, and that would be tariff rates, but you'd better start cleaning up all of that forced labor either in your own operations or in your supply chain, because that's coming.
And this is important. I mean, I saw your piece on LinkedIn. Indonesia remains a critical part of the global supply chain. Obviously, nickel powering the energy transition, seafood reaching markets worldwide. Two questions, really. Why Indonesia? I mean, there's plenty of other countries in our backyard whose human rights records are patchy at best as we sit here right now. Why Indonesia?
Because that was one of the first deals that got done, and it is it's more of it's a serious problem in Indonesia. It's a serious problem in Southeast Asia, forced labor. But the wording in the White House fact sheet is that Indonesia has committed to adopt and implement a forced labor import ban, and to remove provisions that restrict workers and unions from exercising freedom of association and collective bargaining rights. That could have been written by any Democratic administration wanting this, and the Trump administration, if they succeed on this builds on what you looked at what they did in Trump 1.0, the Uyghur Forced Labor Protection Act. That came out of the Trump administration. All of those export bans on Malaysian companies which have forced labor in their factories that were shipping, PPE during COVID, and those export bans were hit on Malaysian companies, and they had to redo all their finances. The Trump administration is taking this seriously.
So why are Republicans more woke than Democrats?
I think the Democrats do it more from a human rights perspective. The Republicans, or certainly say the America First, say we are at an unfair advantage from a business perspective when all of this goes on, because we don't allow this. Again, I'll put in air quotes there, because there's plenty of labor issues in the United States, but not like there are here in this part of the world. And so they look at it as a competitiveness issue. Either way, you're improving human rights. When in Southeast Asia, in the Biden administration tried to do it, the Obama administration tried to do it, and the Trump administration is actually doing it.
So should other Southeast Asian nations be worried? Should parts of South Asia be worried? There's plenty of forced labor issues around the world. That's one. And number two, how do you enforce it?
Well, no, you can enforce it. And well, one, yes, you should be worried about this. You should be cleaning up your own operations and your supply chains now, not just to the standards of international standards. And then how do you do it? You have to go. What the United States will do is customs will go into a factory and they will look at the conditions of where the migrant workers are living, and they will look at the employee health and safety standards in those factories. And if those factories are exporting to the U.S. and they do not meet standards, the United States will say you can no longer export to the U.S. And it's happened to multiple companies in Malaysia in particular. And then what happens is, because the U.S. is looking at it, all the NGOs out here start doing their own investigations, and then they bring it to the U.S. government, and then the U.S. government goes in. And I do think you are going to see some positives.
I just want to follow up because it's a listener relevant point here. Steve says, Ian, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't this labor issue under the TTP, which U.S. withdrew from?
Yes. Now, the Trump administration withdrew from the TPP, as you correctly point out, because they don't believe in multilateral agreements. Right. They don't believe that they believe the U.S. is strongest when it works one-on-one. So the U.S. is taking a lot of what was in the TPP and putting it into this agreement with Indonesia.
Ironically enough, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And never mind the fact that the Trump administration just announced they're taking the sanctions off of Myanmar.
Yes, which is comforting.
So, which, as we all know, is a human rights stalwart of gold stars for. Anyway, it's just it beggars belief. Okay, let's move on. Thailand-Cambodia, massive escalation this week in fighting along the border. At least 16 people or so were killed. More than 100,000 civilians have been displaced. Thai deployed fighter F-16s against Cambodia on the border on Thursday. I mean, it's a mess. What are the challenges here, Steve? What are I think we can probably imagine what the potential downside is to all of this.
I'll take this from a geopolitical perspective, because this has been going on since France was redrawing maps 100 years ago. And I'm not going to pretend to know anything about what happened and why. But what we see now is that the U.S., it is in the U.S. interest to come in and try and tamp this down and not let this escalate any further, because this could have real geopolitical tensions. The U.S., besides some vague statement, not a vague statement, but maybe one statement, the U.S. is no longer cares, right? The U.S. is out of this now. China is not doing anything for their own reasons, and ASEAN is not being nearly as effective this time. They haven't been effective at all as they did the last time this came up about a decade ago, where the Indonesians really got on top of it and left this from spiraling. So what you need to be worried about is obviously people dying in Southeast Asia, in Thailand and Cambodia, but could this really get out of control? Because you have, Thailand is a U.S. ally. Thailand is a key part of the United States for the American military, for its diplomatic presence in the region. Cambodia is part of how China is trying to get into Southeast Asia and using it as a strategic foothold, and it's a key part of the Belt and Road Initiative. And if this ends up being a proxy war, and it is not, and no one wants it to be, but if it goes there, then it is going to be much worse. If now this becomes a proxy fight between the U.S. and China, that's why the U.S. and China and ASEAN should be trying to stop this now.
Yeah. But will it happen? I mean, there is an economic element to it. They're both facing 36% tariffs from August the 1st. They've both got economic and political issues. You've got the Thai military trying to shore up its power. You've got the Hun Sen family trying to hold on to their power. Is this classic politics stirring nationalist sentiment as a convenient distraction from economic woes?
Of course, and that's why you need a third party to come in. Is it going to, and it had been ASEAN at times before in this dispute. It could be the United States, yet they aren't. And all of the reasons that this keeps happening decade after decade is not surprising. The question is is this going to tell us that the world is going to become much more destabilized when you have these type of historical regional flashpoints? They're all over the world. This is one of them. And are we going to be able to prevent this from happening like we have in the past with a distracted, at best, United States, with China looking out for its own rights, and with ASEAN not being able to come together?
Fascinating, but very dangerous.
Very dangerous. It really wasn't smart of the Thai Prime Minister to call Hun Sen uncle, which was then leaked to the media, and she'll take care of the problem. Of course, they've got a family relationship, the Shinawat family and the Hun Sen family, two wealthy families that goes back a long way.
And she dissed the military, the Thai military, which
and now the military has a chance to reassert itself.
Yep. And then you look at the United States, where Trump is he divorces geopolitics from trade. Cambodia's got 49% tariffs hanging over them. Thailand has 36% tariffs hanging over them. And so the U.S. has lost a lot of credibility. But this is an own goal on the United States when you just don't think that tariffs are not part. You can divorce tariffs from your geostrategic interests. This is going to make the U.S. much worse off by having these types of tariffs and losing the credibility and goodwill that it had had for decades, that it had built up over time.
All right, let's move on. The Chinese and European Union have been meeting in Beijing. Xi Jinping and also Li Qiang, the Chinese premier, have met on Thursday with European Council President and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. So is China now kind of trying to get Europe closer into its sphere of influence, as it has been trying to do with Asian countries?
Well, it's trying, but it's got really real difficulties in doing that. And this was supposed to be a 2-day summit, got pared back to 1 day. They had some, barely, common statement on the climate crisis. So again, something that it impacts the entire world. At least they have that. But Europe has serious issues with China, as everybody has when it comes to Chinese industrial policy. The Chinese have spent $250 billion in about the last 10 or 15 years to create the strongest electric vehicle capacity that there is. BYD being the prime national champion, BYD all over Southeast Asia. And the Europeans are saying, you cannot decimate our electric vehicle industry. You cannot decimate our auto industry. So we are going to have high tariffs on electric vehicles, and the Chinese don't like it. The Chinese need that access to a domestic market. And so what happens is the Europeans and the Chinese have the same issues that the Americans and the Canadians and the Brazilians and the Indians have when it comes to electric vehicles. And frankly, some in Southeast Asia do too. They don't, as good a car as BYD is, they don't want it flooding this part of the world.
Right. So you had European leaders voice their concerns about EVs, about trade imbalance, about China's ongoing support for Russia in the Ukraine war. And I think if you listen really carefully, you can almost hear China struggling to contain their indifference.
These aren't just words. I mean, the Europeans have tariffs on the Chinese. They're the same as the Americans have tariffs on the Chinese and the Indians and Brazilians and others. No, this isn't just words of Europe. This is hitting the car manufacturers in China in particular, and the Chinese do not like this, but the Chinese also recognize that they have to keep some good relations with Europe, so they're not going to go to a full-out trade war over this. It's not like the Chinese, what they did to the Australians, where they just, shut down, wine, and they as a result of Australia having the temerity to challenge China on the origins of COVID. So Europe's got a lot more bargaining power and leverage than the Australians do. But China still has a lot of cards. They've got to work out the rare earth. So this was a summit that no one expected much to come out of, and expectations were met.
So Europe needs to behave like you in a cinema. Is that what you're getting out? The EU needs to behave like you in a cinema.
Don't you think the world would be a better place if we were all just passive-aggressive all the time?
We all just behaved like Steve. All right,
No,
Steve.
me and Neil.
Yeah.
Not you.
Yeah,
You're too
well.
nice and polite, Glenn.
Honestly, I'm
Me
probably
and
somewhere
Neil.
between the two. Somewhere between the two.
Don't kid yourself.
All right, Steve.
Don't kid yourself.
Would you like us to bust through the top of the hour? No, you wouldn't. So be quiet.
No happy birthday?
Happy
no
birthday,
happy
Steve.
birthday?
Everybody wished Steve a happy birthday 2
Hey,
days ago.
And let me just say, this side of the table still in the 50s.
Oh, Jesus. Steve will not be back with us ever again. But anyway, okay. Hey, thanks, Steve.
See you next week.
See you soon.
To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.